You're listening to All In. This is the podcast dedicated to helping you fulfill the mission of God in your life and around the world. I'm your host, Jeff Roper. Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode of All In. So glad you've taken time to join me today as we journey into fulfilling the mission of God in your life and around the world. This week I've got a return guest, a guy that I count as a dear friend and a close brother, none other than Gabe Barrero. Gabe was on the show back in December of 2014, so that's been now just over 2 years ago, and a lot of things have changed in his life, and I wanted to get an update in what's happening in his world and pick his brain a little bit, and I thought I would invite you, my dear listener, to join in on this conversation. So Gabe, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Jeff. It's great to be a part of this and to be in partnership with you for all these years.
Thank you. Well, the last time that you were on the podcast, you were I think the title was Missional Pastor for the Northwest District. I think that was the title they were using. And that's how you and I got to know each other, was you functioning there. But since then, you have, I don't know if you consider it a lateral move or promotion, but you are now the supervisor of the North Pacific District that, if my geography serves me correctly, includes Oregon, a little bit of Washington State, probably the Vancouver, Washington area, and the state of Alaska. Is that correct?
Yep, that's pretty much it. The Southwest Washington churches that I work with are the ones along the Columbia River.
Oh, okay. So those would be included in the district as well?
Yeah.
Great.
All the way up to Kelso, Washington.
Oh, wow, that far up. Okay, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Now, when did you come into this role?
This April will be 2 years.
Okay.
So, yeah. Coming close to 2 years.
In your humblest and wildest but most honest dream, was this something you ever saw yourself doing, as being a supervisor?
No, I did not. That's the honest to God truth. In fact, when I was working in the Northwest District, I had already began to think about re-engaging pastoral ministry or planting a church when I was asked to be one of the 3 people that were interviewed for this assignment. And I resisted. I wasn't 100% sure that that was the thing for me. But like with all these things, you put it through the God loop. I prayed about it with my wife, and we felt like we should definitely go through the interview process. And to my surprise, because I knew who the other candidates were, these were phenomenal leaders, of which I said, just pick one of them, and I would follow them. The board still came back around and felt like my wife and I were the people for this assignment, and very humbled, but also very honored to be able to serve the churches in this district.
Now, tell me how that process went for you. I mean, you said you were contemplating going back maybe into more direct pastoral ministry or planting a church, meaning, I don't know if you're thinking of leaving the district ministry that you had, but you were kind of heading towards back to the local church in ministry, and then all of a sudden you get this thing from left field, as it were. How did you process through that?
Yeah, Dave Veach and I, who's a supervisor of the Northwest District, we had a great partnership, and I've been working with him for going on 7 years. And I had began to think about still serving the district, the Northwest District, from the local church context instead of from the district office. And so even though I was considering going back to either planting a church or pastoring a church, we had been kind of in the dialogues of how I would stay connected. And so it wasn't like I was going to be totally done, because I really had grown to love working with church planters, the training of church planters, and just, giving myself to the mission of the region, of the Cascadia region. And so I knew that I had much to give, but I also felt like there was a great need in the district as well to have a model of pastoring a church or planting a church where there were apprenticeship built into it. And so that was the thing that I was thinking about really giving myself to, was whether I was pastoring or planting a church, I would actually be feeding the church planting movement, so to speak, by developing an apprenticeship and modeling that for some other churches that were kind of thinking along the same lines.
Now, as you were processing through this, you and Nicole were praying about this on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 being, it's just an idea, we're wondering, and 10 being 100%, we believe this is where we're going. Where were you on that spectrum and making that decision to go and either plant or pastor?
We were it was definitely tilted towards going to plant or pastor. In fact, I felt like at the time I was 44 years old when I was thinking about this, and I felt like these are my best years. I think I'm still relatively young. I've got some energy, and as much as I loved working in the district and serving the churches in the Northwest District, I still felt like these are my best years. I should probably be pastoring and giving myself to the development of leaders. So I was definitely leaning towards that being the next season of my life, because I felt like this is it, And so in some ways, when the opportunity came to be a supervisor, I really wrestled with that. I thought, if I go work at the district office, I am giving away those years from pastoral ministry in the classical sense that we sometimes think about it. And so it was definitely a challenge for sure.
How did you process through that? Because I'm thinking about you've kind of got this sense in your heart that you're going to go one way, and all of a sudden you get this pitch to you from left field, and now you've got to start recalibrating everything in what you've got set in your heart. You and Nicole have got set in your heart about where you're sensing you're going, and I think many of us have been faced with that. But I'm wondering how you process that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for us there was a couple things. One was really personal to our marriage, and that was that when my wife and I planted the church back in Eugene in 2003, it really was a partnership for us in ministry. We did it together. Working at the district office was not so much, even though my wife engaged certain elements of the church planting training process and had a lot to give there. There were many, many other things that it was just me, doing the work of the ministry in the district context. So for us, it was really personal that when we began to look at either planting a church or pastoring a church that needed to maybe be missionally recalibrated, we began to envision us teaming together in that at a level that we once knew. And so, the idea of going back into pastoral ministry was really strong for us on that level. However, I think that when we began to think about this opportunity to be a supervisor, although we didn't have an understanding of how we would partner in that role, we were open to discovering maybe new dimensions in our ministry experience that we had never had gone through. And that was risky, but at the same time, we felt a peace about pursuing what that partnership would look like for us as a couple working in a district, serving the churches. And we have yet to make, discoveries on that area, but my wife and I are really together in this, and we both felt a call to serve in the district where we planted and lived amongst great leaders. We felt a real affinity in a sense of being given back to our family and the place where we were mentored and developed as leaders ourselves. it felt in some way like almost like a full circle coming back home, and that was special as well.
Okay. Now, when you were going through this decision making process, did you set up any particular markers along the way that would help indicate you're on the right path?
Um, on the district supervisor appointment, the only thing that we felt that we really the Lord was asking us to do was go through the process of what is a by the way a phenomenal process of sitting before the board and a personnel interview team that's really trying to measure a leader's call to the profile of a district supervisor role. And so we felt like that in and of itself is a privilege, and that we would learn a lot going through the process. Beyond that, we really were saying that's our next step, and we have no control over whether we're the fit that they're looking for. And so we just took it one step at a time. And and honestly, I mean, in some ways, we felt like if we're not who they want, then that's great. Then there's obviously someone else, and that's fine. But at the same time, you have to remember that we were thinking, well, if they don't pick us, well, we definitely know what we're going to do. We're either going to plant or pastor a church. So
Uh-huh.
there was just a real freedom in that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. That makes perfect sense. And so how long of a process was this for you guys to go from the initial invitation to start considering it to the point you said yes?
It felt pretty fast for me. I think I don't exactly have the right dates down, but I feel like I was brought into the process in of just praying about whether I'd go through the interview process. I think it was in February, the end of February. I believe the interviews were in late March, and then we were appointed. I think the first or second week of April, and then I was in the North Pacific District office on the 16th. So it went by pretty fast, in my opinion, but there was a great process and great support and scaffolding to make that transition effective.
Now, you've used this word process a lot in this, and that's actually one of my favorite words. It used to not be, but over the years I've learned to do this thing I call embrace the process, because it's amazing
Mm-hmm.
what God does in you and through you and around you when you're not trying to get through the process, you're not trying to endure the process, but you are actually embracing the process. And that sounds like a similar thing of what you were going through as well. Just go through the process and see where it takes you.
Yeah, I think there was a time in my life where um, going through this kind of a scenario, this process of being a candidate for a supervisor, I think in my early years of ministry, I would have probably been afraid of the process because of potential rejection or insecurities about our capabilities, competencies, as it pertains to matching up against the role. But in this scenario, at this time in my life, I really loved the process. I was learning a lot um, from an organizational standpoint, how we actually do this as a Foursquare family. I was very intrigued by how they set up what is somewhat of a new process for us. And also, I believe that I'd make some discoveries about myself in the interview, in the write-up of my profile, and the various things that they had me do. I welcomed the process because it was one of which I'd never been through, and so there was a lot of discoveries and a lot of soul searching and a lot of unpacking of the things that I think are sometimes deep within our soul. That it's a process like that actually brings to surface some of the things that God has been doing in our lives.
Well, if you don't mind, are there any particulars in that process of self-discovery that you can share with me, with us?
Yeah, one of the things that the process helped me to see was in writing a timeline of my own development as a leader, and kind of looking at the narrative of how what God has done in my life and through my life. I began to see that there's definitely some congruency with, being a part of the Foursquare family, part of the organization, at this level, as a supervisor. There was a lot of congruency, of which was was good, and that was a great discovery for me to see that, hey, it could be that the Lord has really prepared me for something like this. Now, that doesn't mean that it's done, but that there's been an emergence, in my life towards this role of serving the churches. And so that was really good. There's also some things I think that um, the process also revealed that I really do care deeply about our pastors and their development and their health, and them finishing well, and them living into God's preferred future for their life and for their churches. And in the process of kind of penciling that and fleshing that out, as well as in the interview process, um, uh, there was there was this kind of awakening, or this discovery, that these things really do matter to me very deeply. And 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 thankfully, that's what I saw, because that's what this role is about: is serving our churches and serving our leaders well, and really caring about that, really caring about them, and the churches that are already existing, and the people that they influence through outreach in their communities.
How does that discovery or those discoveries now inform your ministry focus as a supervisor of other churches? And how many churches, before you answer, how many churches are in the district that you oversee?
I believe that at the moment there are 125 churches.
Okay.
Now, I say at the moment because it literally can change tomorrow. I think we're going to have a church register tomorrow.
Right,
And
right. So
so,
roughly
yeah,
125. So how did
yeah.
these discoveries of how God has been shaping you, how do those things now inform your own ministry focus as a supervisor to these 125 plus churches?
Yeah. Well, um, you know, I think there's a couple of ways that I look at that. One is, we exist as an organization because of the Spirit's work, obviously, in bringing us together as a family, but we exist as an organization because of the leaders.
Hmm.
We organize around the call of God on leaders' lives that began to partner and work together, and then there's a structure and organization around that. And so for me, I think, we exist because of our leaders and the people that they influence. And I believe that that's what makes us significant, and that's what's really important, from the district level. And so now, what the churches do, and what the leaders do, it becomes obviously a part of the district's importance or care or attention. And so, we want leaders that are healthy and strong. And I think in my own life, um, I know that I don't finish the race that God has before me if I'm not healthy at every level. That my theological vision is correct, that my motives are correct, that I'm processing life with great hope and expectation of the invading kingdom of God. All the things that would make healthy ministry, um, and with the reliance on the Spirit instead of white knuckling it ourselves as leaders. Those are the things I deeply care about and want our pastors to kind of live into that flourishing the way that God would want them to live as healthy leaders. And healthy leaders obviously reproduce healthy disciples and healthy churches. And so that's really important to me. And again, that's starting with me very personally. The journey that I've been on has been a discipleship journey with the Lord in becoming a healthy leader. And not because of what I do, but because of my being in Christ and processing life through becoming more Christ-like. So that definitely, I mean, at the leadership level, is super important. to me, and that our district has healthy and strong leaders that are multiplying and flourishing in whatever context they're in. And as a result of that, then we try to partner with the churches to gather all of us towards that goal. And so the implementation of what we would call programs or initiatives around leadership development kind of embody that much larger vision of what we're trying to help people live into that Christ-like, enduring faith and lifelong ministry.
Now, as you've been in this role now, coming up to your 2-year anniversary, what areas have you personally experienced needs for growth to be able to serve at this level?
That's a great question. It's really clear to me that there's a voice that you have to find in this assignment that's different than anything I've ever been in before. And that's not to say that it needs to be louder or that it needs to be more. It just needs to be what is God saying to the churches, and that's there's a responsibility with that I think I'm learning how to go deeper and to discern those things and to really rely on the Spirit to use what I write or what I say in a way that's much larger and maybe not as specific that would affect the larger our constituency of leaders in the district. So I find myself where I think I was more prescriptive or more pointed to certain contexts. I find that works obviously when I'm speaking to one pastor and understand their context, but when you're dealing with a very large region, you're speaking to a multiplicity of contexts, and yet there's something that needs to be said to that whole geography. I don't know if that makes sense, Jeff,
Yeah,
but it's finding a new voice and how to communicate to the churches is definitely something I'm excited about, but yet I think it is challenging.
Yeah, that's a thing that as a leader seems like we really have to wrestle through. I used to hear this phrase that bothered me until I actually came to understand it, which is "fake it until you make it," and I didn't understand what they meant by that until I got into particular roles where I didn't feel like I fit completely. I hadn't grown quite into that role in my experiential aspects as a leader, but I knew there were functions and things that I had to be able to do that were incumbent upon that role in ministry. And so there were times that I would have to, and I felt like I was faking it. I was doing it because I knew this is what I had to do, but I didn't feel internally that I had the substance for it, but I would do it and I would grow into it. Almost like, when you're practicing a new riff on your guitar, or you're learning a new, when I was training for running a marathon and learning how to certain training techniques where I go, this just feels awkward. It doesn't feel like who I am. But then you do it and then you grow into it. Did you ever experience anything similar to that?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think our first fall conference felt that way, to get up in front of such wonderful leaders. My own pastor, Steve Overman, and many other people that influenced my life, people that I respect dearly, to stand in front of them and lead the district. I had those feelings of like, okay, like this doesn't feel right, but at the same time, the assurance and the confidence that, okay, but God has called me to this, and so I get to live into that. And I think it's similar. Maybe I do reflect upon the calling of Peter and after the great catch of fish that he had as a result of obeying the Lord and dropping the nets. He doesn't come back and say to Jesus, hey, can you be here tomorrow and let's do this all over again because you just made me a lot of money. He falls to his feet. He falls at Jesus' feet and he says, "Get away from me, I'm a sinful man." And then are those moments in this where you realize this is a God thing, this isn't me. I don't really belong in this environment, but at the same time, God has called me in the same way that He told Peter, "Now get up, you're ready to be a fisher of men." I think we have those those epiphany moments where we realize, yeah, this isn't about me, this is about Jesus, but I'm going to live into it.
Yeah, and I can tell you as a participant in that first district conference that you led, you did a great job, and you led it with grace. And I remember sitting there and at the church there where it was being hosted and everything, and you did a great job. And with grace, you did portray it in such a way that was filled with grace, filled with humility, but also filled with that confidence of God's anointing on your life, that it was the call of God, not your own ability, that got you to that role. And so, kudos to you, man. Way to go.
Yeah, it was Sam Rockwell. He gave me probably the most sobering encouragement when I was appointed and it was made public. I got a call from Sam Rockwell, and he said, "Congratulations, you've been promoted to a new level of incompetency." And I thought, that's good. That's really good. That's right. It was great. It was. I knew he was joking, but I also knew that's right. There's a lot to learn, and I think that's one of my values. That's why I really enjoyed the comment, because I thought, that's right. I really believe in lifelong learning, and God's going to put us in situations that are challenging, and part of that challenge, part of it is that we would go through a life-shaping process, that we become more Christ-like, and I definitely feel that in my own life right now, for sure.
Yeah. Now, you were talking earlier about developing the pastors, that for them to be healthy at every level. How do you do that? What are you doing to help shape the pastors that open the door for influence into your life? Because not every pastor is going to. Some are.
Yeah.
They've got their way and they're happy with that. You're going to have others that are more pliable. They're just like humans. They're going to be at various levels. But those who come and say, "Hey, Gabe, shape me here, mentor me," or they give you any opportunity, what are you doing that you're finding some traction with, or that some excitement in your own personal life with?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think about it in a couple different ways. One of them is I think about the environment of our district, or the culture of our district, and I've worked really hard in this last year and a half at assuring our pastors that this is a safe environment, that sometimes there's concealment, or sometimes we don't want to be honest or authentic or transparent with our weaknesses, because we don't really know what the result of that is going to be, of that being transparent. And what I want to say to our pastors is, this is a safe environment for there to be disclosure, for there to be that kind of honesty or transparency, and that there, on the other side of that, there's going to be resourcing and care and working together to solve whatever the issue is, that maybe is producing unhealth. And so there's an environment that I'm trying to help foster, an environment that's safe, and an environment that actually inspires people to move towards health, that people would see the value in finishing well, that people would understand that we all go through phases in our life of real specific development that the Spirit's actually initiating and wanting us to go through. And if we can understand that, then we should invite those process, that kind of discipleship in our own life for the rest of our life. And so inspiring people to give themselves fully to that is, again, I believe, a culture where we all value finishing well and entering into God's preferred future for our lives. And so, there's the culture part of it. Then there's the actual implementation, So one of the things that we've done is we've done appreciative inquiry, going out to the field and really taking time to hear our pastors, whether it's through our divisional superintendents or actually meeting one-on-one with our pastors, and getting a sense of what are the collective needs of the district. There's many needs, but can we identify some collective struggles or some collective needs, some collective empowerment that our pastors all need, and then identifying and prioritizing then how we're going to, design certain kinds of trainings around, that specific empowerment that we're wanting to develop within the district around training. And so, those are, that's kind of the environment side, and then more of the how do we actually harvest the information that leads us to make the decisions on implementing certain kinds of trainings. And so I would say that right now we're at a place where we've identified some things that would serve a good collective of our churches. Now, how we actually go about the delivery system of how we go about doing that training, there's three things that we found are as kind of a holistic approach to training, and we call our first one recreate training, our second is innovate training, and our third is accelerate training. And recreate training, we found in the district that a lot of our pastors, some of the health that we wanted to foster was helping our pastors get outside of their own church, and just helping them get out into the beautiful region of the country that we live in. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of our recreate training is adventure-based training, where I'll give you just one picture, and then you can kind of take it from there. But what would training look like on the banks of a river, as we, river raft down the Mackenzie? What would it look like if that was a 2-day trip? And we actually we had leadership conversations on the banks of a river around a campfire in the outdoors in the beautiful creation that God's given us. So that would be kind of an example of our recreate training. The accelerate training is what I think most of us are used to in one-day symposiums. We felt like in ministry there's a time where we just need to accelerate learning, and there's just like putting another log on the fire. We need to stoke the fire in our leaders' lives. And the accelerate training is very specific contextual training for addressing something that we're struggling with within culture. And then the third one is probably something new for us, and that is for us as a movement, and that is in partnership with George Fox Seminary, which is now called Portland Seminary. We developed at this moment right now we have 2 courses that are 4 to 6 week courses that give pastors an opportunity to actually solve a problem in their context of ministry, and that they can develop some type of prototype strategy to implement into whatever they're trying to solve. And so in that context, we need to provide much more time for research, for processing, and for being prescriptive. And that's new. I think that's new for a lot of our leaders, but I'm excited about at least those 3 kinds of approaches to training.
Yeah, those are outstanding. I like them all. Now, what about when those are with probably more existing churches, existing leaders? When it comes to church planting, and you and I, this is where we've done most of our work together, is with church planters. When you are filtering through a church planter applicant or a potential church planter, what are you looking for? What are the skill sets, the ways of thinking, experience? What are you looking for?
Yeah. Another great question. I think that, first of all, when someone calls me and asks me about potentially church planting, I get so excited. It's, to me, it's such a unique, special, and sometimes even miraculous phone call that someone would be willing to explore that. A couple of things I think that are important for the times that we live is I'm looking for someone that has shown, a fruitful pastoral ministry in some contexts, whether they're the senior pastor or assistant or youth pastor. I think that obviously in planting a church, some pastoral ministry experience is really key. Working with people, and was that leader in that context? Were there people really following, and were they helping shape whatever was going on in that ministry? So we measure that through interviews, through an assessment that we have to kind of help us get to what experience there is in that region of that leader's life. The other thing we look for is how are they living missionally right now. I think most of the candidates that we have for church planting will admit that as a result of being within the ministry of a church have disconnected themselves from lost people on the outside. Mm-hmm. And that's understandable because they're probably discipling or they're probably leading groups of people that are doing outreach, but we have to kind of reorient them to what does it look like to really befriend lost people and find lost people and win lost people themselves personally. So, I'm trying to measure, what is that activity in their life? And even if it's devoid, sometimes we can say, well, when was there a time in your life where that was really strong? Usually it was right around the time of their conversion that it was really strong. And so we try to reconnect them with that kind of evangelistic lifestyle and that missional impulse, that DNA that God's deposited in them. And so, we look at those. I also look for leadership, entrepreneurial kinds of activity in their life. How are they, do they step out into in new ways? Do they enjoy stepping out into the unknown? Do they take calculated risk? Are they okay with living with question marks, but nonetheless taking steps towards something? We kind of measure that as well. We want to see, what that activity looks like. I think that begins to give us a profile of the leader that wants to enter into our training, and then we can begin to formulate, how we're going to help them. And I think that's really important with leaders, is to measure their capacities and then add to that, sharpen some of those things, or even pray that God would rekindle something or activate something that's maybe never even been there before.
Yeah, that's really good. And I've seen these characteristics in a lot of the people that have come through the church planter training that I get to participate with you in from time to time. So these are great markers along the way. I have two more questions for you.
Yeah.
If let's pretend for a moment that I'm a young leader, and I could be a pastor, I could be a staff member, or just a good person in a local church, but on fire for God, want to pursue vocational ministry. And I come to you and I say, Pastor Gabe, I want to finish well. What are the 3 to 5 things I need to do every day, or at least every week, for the rest of my life to finish well? What would you tell me?
That's a good question. I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is I don't know if I'm that systematized, but I'll take a stab at it. I think every day, we have to be aware that the very breath we breathe is a gift, and I think that thankfulness for the Holy Spirit's activity and the humility that comes with recognizing that the Spirit of God is working in and through us is, again, I mean, I don't know how to systematize that other than to say I think it's that awareness and that confidence that we're connected to the unfolding mission of God as the Spirit leads us in us is super important for us to finish well, because no matter what we go through, then we can always tie it back to the Spirit is leading me, and the Spirit will empower me to get through this. Having said that, I think that the cultivation of that discerning what the Spirit is doing comes from, I don't know what the right word is, devotional life, quiet times, whatever it looks like for us to give ourselves to prayer, the Word, getting kind of underneath the canopy of receiving from God, I think is, paramount for every leader to finish well. We need to have We need to know where the fire hose is, or where the spigot is, where we can drink and be filled every day. And I think that what's really important about that is that it reminds us that it's not what we do that makes us significant. It's that being in Christ and abiding in His presence is is paramount to everything else. It's knowing Him and being known, and entering into that union, into that relationship with God, that I think is essential to finishing well. I think another characteristic for us to finish well, and I've kind of hit on it a couple times in our interview here, is just taking a learning posture. I think leaders don't finish well because they may get to a place where they don't know how to interpret what's going on. It could be a crisis in their life. It could be a consequence to a decision that they made. It could be something that's the backlash from a church, or from some group of people in a church, or there's various reasons why leaders want to give up in the ministry. And I think when we hit those crisis moments, I think if we step back and say, okay, Lord, what are you trying to teach me here? What are you trying to cultivate in my life? What are you requiring of me to get through this, that I think ultimately sets us up to finish well? And then when we look back on those situations, we see the redemptive work of God in us and those people, but we also see ourselves ascending into Christ's likeness. And those experiences actually set us up for what's next as we get through that. Mm-hmm. And so, again, that learning posture, I think, is really key, being wide-eyed about, okay, look, what's going on here, and what can I take away? I think we need other people around us to finish well. There's no doubt when a pastor or a leader or a missionary isolates themselves, that for me is a red flag. I think that the communal nature of the kingdom requires of us to stay in community. Mm-hmm. And I think that we live and grow together, and we have so much to learn from one another. And so a high value for giving ourselves to other people, as well as having an open heart for others to give themselves to us, I think is really, really important. And so so I love partnership for that reason. I love, when even the things that we've been doing, Jeff, we've learned together what you're experiencing on the European continent absolutely informs what's going on this other Western, context. Mm-hmm. And so that's just one example of how, I think a leader finishes well when we have good partnerships and people that are in the journey with us. Let's see. I think that's 4. I think one last thing would be, I think our health, and this is probably the biggest one for me right now. Just even our physical health, obviously, right? I mean, if we don't take care of ourselves, we're going to have a heart attack.
Yeah, exactly.
So we talk about spiritual health, but I think the physical, and the emotional health and the psychological health is super important in us finishing well. And I'm not ashamed to say that I do physicals, assessments. I meet with a counselor because I have blind spots, and I need someone to help me see what those are. I want to be healthy, and I want to have a healthy perspective on life. And I do an EQI assessment, which is an emotional quotient assessment, periodically to measure how I'm doing emotionally. And so there's that kind of physiological health component that I think is obviously really important to us finishing well. I got to tell you, I kind of got off the treadmill for a little while, and I was convicted about that, and I got to keep my heart healthy, and so I was back on it yesterday, and I'm a little sore from it, but that's what I mean. I think we've got to be willing to engage physical health as well.
Those are really good. I think if we implement, if nothing else out of this wonderful conversation, if we implemented these 5 practices on a daily or semi-daily basis, the long-term fruit of it would be transformative in our life. One more question for you,
Absolutely.
Gabe, and I've asked you this before on the previous podcast, but I ask it every time I have a guest, and maybe your answer will be different than what you gave me the first time you were on 2 years ago. If I had a time machine and we could go back to your 25-year-old self, what advice would you give?
25-year-old, huh? Wow. Um, wow, you got me there. I think that um, I believe that one of the important things, and I'm really thinking about this right now in terms of our young leaders in the district, I would say, be open to mentoring, being mentored, be that vulnerable and invite those that have gone before you into your life and take initiative in doing that. Um, if there's someone that you admire from afar, do whatever you can to find the connecting point and where you can meet that person. Most people actually would love to share their life and what they've learned. And so if I was 25 years old, all over again, I think that, and I feel like I did a really good job at that, but I would still, continue to give myself to mentoring. I was afraid. I was afraid that I'd ask a stupid question or that I was just off, on my thinking on things. And you're a little insecure about those things sometimes, but nonetheless, I think it's important to invite mentoring. And more than ever right now, as we have so many great leaders that have lived a long life of ministry and pastoring churches, pastors that have planted, churches 35 years ago, they have a lot to give.
Yeah.
They really do. And even though their time in life and their context was much different than what we're engaging with culture right now, nonetheless, I think there's precepts, foundational things that can be imparted versus, looking at the style of ministry that they have and saying, there's a disconnect there. I don't think they've got anything to give me. In fact, they really do.
Yeah. That's really good. And I love what you said too about taking the initiative in it. Over my own experience in it is I was shocked when I started pursuing a handful of people that I had a tremendous amount of love and respect for from a distance. And I remember sitting down with one of them and I'm saying, I'm asking you to speak into my life. I want to learn from you. And they would tell me, and I had this happen a number of times, they would tell, well, I don't think I have anything to offer. And what it was these guys were just so humble. They don't think they're the big shots. And sometimes you just have to take the initiative and pull it out of them and say, hey, can we spend some time together?
Yeah.
And, one of the reasons I started this podcast is so I could talk to great leaders and to say, hey, here's some questions I have. And, they'll talk to me on the podcast and I just press for it. And, don't be afraid, dear listener, don't be afraid to initiate with some leader and say, I'm a young upcoming leader. I want to know something. You've got something I want. Will you help me? And press them. They're not resistant because they're too prideful. They may be resistant because they think, well, what am I going to say to anybody? But press in on it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's one of my greatest joys in the district to be able to connect. I'll hear a young leader, get to know them, and I'll make those connections. I'll be like, you need to talk to Jeff Roper, because that's going to be a great relationship for you. I love to connect people to great leaders, and it feels so good when you find out down the road that was really beneficial and it really added value to that person's development.
Yeah, and it's a real joy, So for for a dear listener, please, press it. There are people that you respect that have something to offer. Press into them, reach out to them. Well, Gabe, thank you so much for being with me today. I always enjoy my time with you, and I just always grow and benefit from it tremendously. So I want to thank you personally for taking time out of your busy and demanding schedule to spend a little bit of time with me and our listeners as we explore these topics. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff. I really appreciate your friendship and our partnership and praying for you and the work that you're doing. God bless you.
Thank you.
Well, we're done now.
Thanks for listening. This is Jeff Roper reminding you that the mission of God is too grand for mediocrity or average living. You were created for a purpose, and that purpose is found in the mission of God. It's your life. Now go live it.